Hey, Pastor Zach with you here today, and I have great news. It's time for another video. We're going through our Bible study series, and today we're going to be talking about what kind of Bible translation to use. And this is pretty exciting for me because this is a really common question that I get. People contact me, what kind of Bible translation should I use? And I've really been thinking about this recently because I've been asking myself the question, what Bible translation should I preach from? I've kind of been preaching from translations that I assumed were the right translations to preach from, but I've noticed a couple things I didn't like about them, and I really started digging into the translations to get a little more information, just to create for myself an idea of what would be best for not just my study, but the people that I'm preaching to, what's easiest for them to understand what's going on. And so today we're going to talk about that. Now, the first thing you might wonder is, why do we have so many different Bible translations? Why do we need so many different translations? Is it so hard to take the Greek, Hebrew, Aramaic text that the Bible was originally written in and go ahead and move that right over to English? What makes that so difficult? And the problem is the language doesn't work the same way. English reads much differently from Hebrew, Greek, Aramaic. It's just a different language and it has different nuances. If you've ever attempted to try to make it through high school Spanish like I did, or high school French like I did, you might realize that you have to learn how the language works before you can really speak it. And the reason for that is because languages have their own nuances. They have different things that happen. And if I were to take a Greek portion of the New Testament and hold it up in front of you, you wouldn't even know, unless you read Greek, you wouldn't know what to do with it. And even if you did read modern Greek, you may not still be able to read ancient Greek. You probably couldn't figure it out, but it would be kind of like, I don't know if you've ever read like maybe early 1800s English from the early Americas. They're not really spelling things the same way or necessarily right. They use different words, that kind of thing. Same kind of problem with Greek. And not only that, they smushed all the words together. There's no spaces between the words. So we really kind of have to look and be able to dissect out the words and break them apart and be able to create these usable phrases that we can move over into English. Now, not only that, we've got some other complexities. We're not going to get too deep into translating because for the average person, it just is not going to matter. It's not going to matter for you how to translate Greek into English, but what you do need to understand is why the translations translate the way they do, and to understand a little bit of how Greek works helps you with that. So we're not going to try to teach you Greek here today. We don't have a video long enough for that right here, and I'm not smart enough to teach you all the nuances you need to read the original Greek text. I have my own original Greek text, and I can sort of kind of make through certain portions of it, but we're not doing that today. What we're going to do is what we're going to discuss are some of the hardships that you have when you're trying to translate from one language into another, and specifically Greek, Hebrew, Aramaic, especially these old languages, into English. And the biggest problem that you have are idioms. Okay? So it's very simple to try to take a word and translate it into English. What makes it more difficult is that we have things that we say that make sense to us in our cultural framework, but it doesn't work for people, it doesn't work for other cultures that don't speak the same kinds of languages. Like, hypothetically, really what happened with the Got Milk campaign. If you remember the Got Milk campaign, there's a campaign that dairy farmers put together, and they put up billboards and commercials, and it just said Got Milk. And the thing was it's common in English in the United States to be driving somewhere and to think to yourself, boy, do we have milk? Do we got milk at home? That's a common phrase. Now, it was so successful in English, they decided they were going to try to move it down to Mexico and that they were going to make a Spanish translation of these Got Milk campaign billboards. They kind of missed the point, though, and the translation wasn't quite right, and unfortunately, technically, it said Got Milk, but the idiom didn't cross over, and really it said something more to the effect of, are you lactating? Yeah, not what they were trying to get across. Not what they were trying to. There's some wasted money right there. And so, similarly, this is D.A. Carson made a point about going from English over into French. In English, you might say, I have a frog in my throat. If you can't speak or you're coughing or something like that, it's an idiom. You don't literally mean that you have a frog in your throat, but if you say that to somebody, they understand that you're having a hard time speaking or something's going on or you're coughing, something's going on with your throat. They don't have that same idiom in French. Their idiom that means about the same kind of thing is, I have a cat in my throat. Now, in English, if I say to you, I have a cat in my throat, you're going to look at me a little funny. But in French, it makes perfect sense. And so you might say, well, take the idiom and translate it over into the English equivalent idiom. If they say, I've got a cat in my throat, change it to, I've got a frog in my throat. Except sometimes the language of the idioms carries a little bit of meaning that can be lost if you don't have it. And so that's the problem that commentators have. The problem they have is that the original language does not translate quite as smoothly into English. And the more smooth you want that language to appear in English, the more you kind of have to change the wording. You have to change the wording a little bit. You have to make a couple of assumptions. You have to reorient words. You have to connect certain words to other words. And so basically what has happened is translators have ended up in this problem where they need to try to make the words the clearest English they can while being faithful to the original language. They want you to be able to read the text and understand it about as well as you possibly can, considering you're not reading it in the original Greek, Hebrew, Aramaic. Now, what they basically decided to do is that there's two different camps for translations. Okay, so there's two different camps. I'm going to talk about a couple of other translations that we're going to talk about once I introduce these two camps. These two camps are word for word and thought for thought. So closer to the word for word is they try to, despite what it does to the English language, they try to stay as close to the original Hebrew, Greek, Aramaic as they can and try to retain as much. Now what happens is we get really choppy language. When you start reading anything Paul's written, Paul loves run-on sentences because the wording is so nuanced. Now, to us, it reads as a run-on sentence. Now, it makes a little more sense in Greek. Now, when the other end of the spectrum, so there's word for word, and then there's thought for thought is essentially what we call it. There's a couple other phrases. You might call this one formal equivalent, but for all intents and purposes, the easiest way to remember is word for word and thought for thought. So thought for thought, what thought for thought tries to do, and every translation does thought for thought to make it readable in English, period. But the more thought for thought you get, the further they get away from the type of wording in the original language. Okay? Now, those are the two camps that we're going to use for Bible study, right? So your translation for Bible study should fall in one of these two camps. Now, there's two camps that I'm going to recommend that you not use for Bible study. The first one I'd recommend you not read at all. And that's what we're going to call a corruption. Okay, a corruption is where translators actually change the text for the purposes of trying to prove some point that they've got to get across. And so, if you've ever had a Jehovah's Witness knock at your door, they read the same Bible you do if you're a Christian, but it's not the same. Because if you say to them, oh yeah, let me bring my New International Version, or let me bring my New King James Version, or my ESV, no, those are not proper translations, we'll say. The only proper translation is the New World Translation. That's what they think. Now, the New World Translation was actually just, most people don't even believe it was truly translated. They think that they took previous original texts, maybe King James Version, and just copied word for word, and then changed the phrases that they needed to get rid of the parts of the Bible that disagreed with what the Jehovah's Witnesses believed. We're not going to use that for Bible study. We're not even going there, because it's not a credible text. It's something that you can't seriously use for Bible translation. Also, we're not going to really use any amateur, some Bible college student who decided that he by himself is going to translate the entire Bible, probably doing a half decent job, maybe ripping off a good chunk of an established translation. But we're going to stick to established translations. And the other one we're not going to use is we're not going to use these other translations that are called paraphrases. Now, paraphrases traditionally are not really translations, and the most popular one that we have is the Message. There's nothing wrong with the Message as a book. It's fine. But it's not. It's Eugene Peterson's interpretation. He's the one who wrote the Message. It's his interpretation of how the Bible might have been written in the 90s, early 2000s. That was the whole purpose of him essentially writing the Message. Now, he did start with original text. He did, try to, you might argue that's very, very far thought for thought, but we're not going to use that because it's so far removed from the original text that it's not really anything that I'd be comfortable saying is an original text that we should be using for the sake of Bible study. And so something that what we will use is we're going to use the traditional accepted translations that have been translated by solid teams. You want a team doing your translation. That way you get the guy who's best in Hebrew, translating Hebrew. A lot of these teams are 10, 20 people that get together and translate together. And a lot of times you'll actually get people, this guy specializes in the book of Ruth, and so he's going to take that book on. This person specializes in the book of Mark, and he's going to take on that portion of the text to really go over it. And there's a general editor that kind of keeps an eye on everything, that understands all the original languages and just kind of makes sure everything is all together. Now, the translations that I'm going to give you are also going to be the most popular ones. I want them to be translations that you can readily get. So all of the translations that I'm going to give you today, according to, there's an Evangelical Christian Booksellers Association, they went and made a list of the most popular translations that have been sold, and we're going to use that list to come up with the list of translations that we can pick from. Okay, so the top of the list, always in sales, is the New International Version. New International Version accounts for like 40% of all Bibles sold. And so they are by far the biggest selling translation out there, put out by Zondervan. Now, that translation's been around since about 1978. And it's been through quite a few revisions. There's been a lot of controversy about the revisions. And very quietly, they did a revision in 2011. And this revision in 2011 is actually very, very good text. In fact, most all of the Bibles that you're buying right now are going to be that 2011 revision, unless you've obviously bought one before 2011, and then it's not. Right? You got a previous version, probably most commonly the 1978 one. But the 2011 version is very good. It's a very good translation, and it tries to be more thought for thought. They really try to run the line right in the middle, but they tend to be just a little bit more thought for thought on the spectrum that I was giving you before. The next one is the King James Version, and New King James Version I'm going to include as well, even though it's a little further down on the list because they're pretty similar. these texts are the New King James and the King James Version. Really are meant for people who kind of like the nostalgia of the King James Version. There's a couple people that get very excitable about only reading the King James Version as being the authorized version. That's what they called it when it was originally published in 1611. And so it was actually decreed by the king. He was going to have a Bible translation made so that the average person could read it. And then really, it was based on different text. We're not going to get too much into the original text that these are based off of. But what we've essentially done is over time, we don't have the original copies of the Bible. We don't have the original text that Paul wrote. We don't have all of the originals. What we do have is we have copies that go very close, right? And so some of those copies, you might have a full book. Some of them, I mean, you're talking about things that were written on reeds, like they're, pieces of plant-based material or animal skins. They just didn't hold up over time a lot of times. And so what you'll have is we go back, we find different things. And so there's two different real base. Everybody agrees on the Old Testament. The Old Testament text that we have is pretty much the same across all the translations. New Testament varies a little bit because we've been finding newer copies of the New Testament. Most of the translations go and use this newer text. Now, the difference is there's nothing huge here. You're talking about, if you sat there and wrote out all the differences, you're talking about maybe like a page and a half. A lot of times it's spelling mistakes, maybe a couple of verses. There's some words left out. There are a few spots where there's actual sections where they really debate, was this in the original text or was it added later? And but none of that really changes anything in the Christian belief, in the Christian faith. And so there's nothing really scary about that. The King James Version and the other translations use different ones. So it's pretty much King James, New King James, and there's a newer one that I can't remember off the top of my head that uses the same text. The ESV for the Gideons use some of that text for their Bibles. And so that text is available, but all the other translations have been using the more recent ones. And so that really just kind of depends on the translator. Most of them accept that the newer ones are the way to go. Now, King James, New King James, personally, I'm completely fine. If you like the language of the King James, New King James, go for it. It's a great translation, But for the average person, it's going to be hard to read. It's going to be difficult to read. They don't use, they translated it into language that we don't commonly use today. So the average person's really going to struggle when they're trying to read through the King James, New King James Version. If you're struggling reading through that King James, New King James Version, then I'm going to recommend that you not use it. There's other translations that you can use. And people will be upset about that, but it's the translations I'm going over right now in this section here. They're all fine, whatever you want to use. The next one we're going to talk about is the New Living Translation. New Living Translation, I was talking to a buddy of mine, and he started preaching from that in their church. And the New Living Translation is probably the furthest on the thought-for-thought scale that we have, right? So that's the furthest out here, and the New Living Translation was really written, the concept was based on a paraphrase, but they actually went down and they went back and did a translation, went to the original language, translated it, and just tried to make it about as readable as possible, and they lowered the reading level just a little bit on it, just so it's a little bit easier to read. So most of these translations hover middle school. Reading level is about what you need for just about any of these translations, except for one, and we'll get to that in a little bit. The English Standard Version is a new version. It's a retranslation. They took the Revised Standard Version and updated it, and which is an older translation. The chances that you have a Revised Standard Version sitting around, very little. But the ESV has been very popular. what the ESV tried to do is they tried to go and become a little bit more word for word and try to keep a little bit more of the natural flow of language. Okay, so it's not as readable as the NIV, but it is going to be a little bit more readable than some of the other translations we have coming up. It's going to be a little more readable than the King James Version, New King James Version. The next one we're going to be talking about is the Christian Standard Bible. This is a new one. Now, this was number 6 on the list that I got of translations that are available, and because the list was from 2016, and technically the Christian Standard Bible is just coming out in 2017. So it'd be reasonable that it's pretty far down on the list. It's a translation that I personally really like. It's put together by Lifeway, just pieced it together, which is really kind of comes from the Southern Baptist Convention generally. But there were a lot of people, different denominations, that worked on this project and helped translate this. And they followed, you may have heard of the Holman Christian Standard Version. They followed the tradition of the Holman Christian Standard Bible and really kind of redid a translation around that concept. Now, their goal was to truly come up with a middle of the line, right? Let's try to line it up here in my video, right here down the center. They really wanted to come up with a middle of the line for the Christian Standard Bible so that you'd be able to get a lot of the original language, but the stuff that was not maybe quite as important to understanding the general direction of the text is reworded a little bit to make it more readable. They really tried to go down the center, and it really has some of the most unique language. When I'm studying and I'm reading through different translations, which is something I'm going to be recommending for you, it's really something that kind of stands out because the language is a little bit different from that than there's a lot of things I read in the ESV and the NIV, and they're very, very similar. It's maybe just the words are rearranged a little bit. And the Christian Standard Bible takes a couple different stances. Nothing crazy, nothing out of the ordinary, but they're a pretty good down the center translation. The New International Reader's Version is something we're not going to necessarily recommend for Bible study unless you have trouble reading, and maybe English is not your primary language, in which case you should probably consider reading in your language. But if you want to grab an English Bible and you want to be studying in it, the New International Reader's Version I think is about fourth grade reading level. And so if you have young kids that want to read the Bible that just aren't up to like a middle school reading level, that's a great translation. Or if English isn't your primary language, that's a good translation. But if you can read the other translations, I'm going to recommend that you go ahead and grab one of the other ones. The final one is the New American Standard Bible. Now, the New American Standard Bible was around 95 the translation that a lot of colleges, seminaries used. It was really popular because they said English is great, but we're going to stay true as we can be to the original text, and it is probably the most word-for-word translation that we have. And there's a few different things that they did to really try to stay as true as they can to the original text. Now, for some of you, that's going to mean that it's not readable, right? You're going to be reading through it, and the Bible is of no use to you if you can't read it and you can't understand it. So if you pick up a translation and you don't understand what the translation's saying, it's just going to be harder for you. Now, I'm not saying you can't use that translation with another translation, but the main translation you use, and this is going to bring me to my main recommendation. My main recommendation is going to be that you read from multiple translations. I think that you should really look into getting multiple translations to be able to read, because they each bring out different nuances in the text, right? And so, and certain things with the idioms. In fact, there are certain things that you're reading the different texts and you read something in the ESV and you're like, boy, I don't really understand what they're trying to get at. I understand they're trying to get to the original language, but I'm missing something. Something's off. There's an example of this in Joshua, right? Joshua 10, chapter 10, verse 6 says in the ESV, the men of Gibeon said, do not relax your hand from your servants. Okay? How many times have you been out, you said to your buddies, Don't relax your hand from me. Don't relax your hand from me. Well, it doesn't make a whole lot of sense to us in English. It's not an idiom that we use in English. It's very, very, very word for word, and it's very, direct to the text, what the text is trying to say. Most all of the other translations, you're talking about the New American Standard. When I looked at the New American Standard, I looked at the New American Standard, the Christian Standard Bible, and the NIV. I compared those to the ESV text. All of the other ones said, do not abandon your service. So there are certain times where even though we're going to say, look, there's the NASB, which is probably the most word for word, and then the ESV is a little bit less. There are certain times where they trade places, right? This is one of those times, right? And there's a couple others. There's a couple things that are kind of funny with the ESV. So what I'm recommending for you is read multiple translations. If you're studying through your Bible, you're doing devotional reading, it's fine to read one translation just to be reading through the Bible. But if you're really trying to get to the heart of a text, the best thing you can do to really start to get a grasp of what the language is trying to do is to grab something over from the word for word category and grab something that's more thought for thought. And read the two of them side by side. Sometimes I will actually grab 3 or 4 different translations just because something's not making sense to me in English, and I want to make sure that I'm getting the best idea here. And so something that I recommend is you can go online. There's a lot of online resources that you can use. There's Blue Letter Bible. There's Bible Gateway. It's something that I use quite a bit. Bible Gateway actually has all of these different translations I listed off, and you can get them for free right on the website. You just go to the website, you type in your passage, and most all of these translations on their websites have the original text. Sorry, I knocked my hair out of the way there. Most of these Bible translations have their own websites, and the text is available for free on their website. And so you can go to their website, you can find out what the best translation is for you, and you can read through quite a few. You can go to Bible Gateway, read multiple translations, and see what you get, see what you enjoy reading, see what really speaks to you, and what you're able to understand the text in. For a lot of people, they like the ESV. The most popular ones here by far are the New International, the King James Version, the New Living Bible, and the ESV. Christian Standard Bible is really coming up there. New American Standard Bible was really popular when they came out with a new version in 95. After they came out with that new version in 95, it became very, very popular. When I'm talking about the NASB translation, I'm referencing the 1995 version. There's an earlier version. It's very, very rarely you run into it. There's a couple study Bibles that really like the earlier version. I don't know why, they just do. And so, but that's what I'm referencing most often. If I say NASB, I mean the 1995 NASB. And that's the most common one. If you go out and buy it, that's what you're most commonly going to get. Now, when the ESV came out, the ESV is relatively new. I think it was about 2001-ish it came out. When the ESV came out, it really upset the NASB. A lot of people who were reading the NASB kind of left it for the English Standard Version, and the NIV has always been very popular. I had when I was in seminary, my Greek professor really loved the NIV, and he said, what is the purpose of Bible translation? The purpose of Bible translation is to understand in your own language the best you can what the original text says. And in his opinion, most often, the NIV was the best translation. He really liked it. So there's a lot of scholars that really like the NIV. NIV really has been most popular. And so when you're looking for a translation, those are a couple things to look at. Those are some things that you really want to consider. You want to ask yourself, boy, can I read the text? Maybe that's your standard text that you're going to use. Maybe you're going to go out and buy that Bible. Maybe if you're going to do that, look, I'm going to recommend ESV is great, and the English, the ESV, the English Standard Version, and the NIV are great translations, and they have solid study Bibles. I'm going to be doing a video coming up where I teach you how to use a study Bible, so you can definitely go get the NIV Zondervan Study Bible, not to be confused with the Zondervan NIV Study Bible. It's the most recent one, is the NIV Zondervan Study Bible. That's the one you want. It has D.A. Carson's name on the front of it. It's typically a white one. I'll leave a link here if you want to pick up a Bible. The ESV Study Bible, incredible study Bible, great notes. To be honest with you, I think the NIV team, the NIV Zondervan Study Bible, once again, not to be confused with the NIV or the Zondervan NIV Study Bible. I can't get over it. I don't know why. Why? If somebody's watching from Zondervan, please send me a message. Tell me why that's the name. I have no idea. But please tell me the name because it's confusing as all get out. Those are two great study Bibles. The NIV Zondervan Study Bible, which came out after the ESV. If you ask me, they patterned it after the ESV Study Bible. And then that's put out obviously by Zondervan. And then Crossway puts out the ESV Study Bible. It's a great study Bible. Like I said, the ESV is a great text. And Christian Standard Bible, I haven't seen the study Bible yet. I haven't, so I can't tell you how the study Bible is. So if somebody out there works for Lifeway and you want to send me a copy, please do. I'll read it, do a review. I'll tell people what I think. We'll take a look at it and see what we can't figure out. But my guess is it's probably going to be pretty close. It's probably going to be a pretty good study Bible as well. And I've been reading the Christian Standard a little bit. It's relatively new. It's only been out for, maybe a matter of months. And so, I've read it here and there. I've read sections and bits and pieces, and I like the translation. It's a good translation. And I definitely use it as one of my standard. When you look at me and what I do my Bible translation from, this is what I bring up. This is what I look at. I look at the NIV and the ESV, and those are really my two standards. If I'm doing general reading, I usually read the NIV or the ESV. They're both great translations for different reasons, and when I preach, most often I will preach from anymore. I used to preach a lot from the ESV. I'm preaching a little bit more from the NIV, only because sometimes when you're reading aloud, it's hard for people to follow the flow of thought when you're going so word for word. But I enjoy reading it. I enjoy reading the ESV, so I personally like reading it. You can kind of make your own decision there, but the translations I use NIV, I use the ESV, and I use the I've started using the Christian Standard Bible. So those are the translations that I've started using that I use pretty often. Every once in a while, I'll go look at some others. Every once in a while, I'll bring up the King James just to see what it has to say. Sometimes I'll bring up the New American Standard Bible just to see what it has to say on the topic. Occasionally, my Bible Gateway screen becomes just incredibly packed. When I'm looking through, that's like a section of my Bible study when I'm looking at the multiple translations. And when I'm going through that, a lot of times Bible Gateways, that's what I use, BibleGateway.com. I go there, bring it up, it brings it up in separate screens. I can grab the passage that I'm looking at, and I can kind of read through the different ones. And it also keeps all the original notes. So I was talking about the idioms before. A lot of translations change the idioms, but you'll see this a lot in the, I think Christian Standard Bible does it, and I think the NIV does it. And when they take those idioms and they change them, they'll actually put a note. So there's a note at the bottom of the page. They'll footnote it down at the bottom of the page, and they'll say, they also say that if there's discrepancies in the manuscripts, they'll say some manuscripts don't include this text or add this text to the original text. But they'll sometimes make a note to say the more accurate translation is this phrase. And you'll see this in a lot of different translations, this phrase here. That's the more accurate one, we've changed it. And so you'll occasionally see that in the notes. But as you're going through, as you're reading, read multiple translations. Don't feel like you have to run out today and go buy a translation. If you, they're all available online for free. Get comfortable with something first. Read something for a while. See how you like it. For some of you, you can't do the computer screen. I get it. You got to buy the physical Bible. And so if you're going to do that, grab a good study Bible. If you're really going to be getting into the study, please grab something that you're going to be able to read. It's something you're going to be able to use. Excuse me. And that's everything that we have right now. We are going to be coming up with more videos. We're going to be going through more. I'm about to jump in. We're going to start talking about some of the different ways that you study the Bible now that we kind of know what the Bible is, now that we know what translation to be using, and how to pick out a translation. We're going to start jumping into how to read the Bible for ourselves, how to study the Bible, and we're going to be putting out some new videos on that I'm super excited about. And in the meantime, if you like the video, give us a like. If you like the channel and you want to follow, we're posting new videos every Sunday, so you will get a new video every Sunday. And go ahead and subscribe to the channel if you want to get more videos. You can also follow us over on Facebook at Pastor Zach, and you can also just do a search for Pastor Zach. Or if you want to visit our website, the website is pastorzach.org. Thank you so much for stopping by, and I look forward to seeing you in the next video.